Okay. Welcome, everyone. I'm Yael Aronoff. I direct the Sterling Institute for Jewish Studies in Modern Israel. We're going to have a fabulous lecture this evening. Before we get to that, I just wanted to remind you that our next lecture is in this room in James Madison College Library on Wednesday, February 21st, also at 5:30, where Professor Amy Simon, who teaches here at James Madison in the History Department and is, of course, Sterling Institute faculty, is going to be speaking about her recently published book, Emotions in Yiddish Ghetto Diaries, Encountering Persecutors and Questioning Humanity. So please return for that, and those of you who are live streaming, that will be live streamed as well. And I also wanted to quickly thank our co-sponsors for this evening's lecture, which include the College of Arts and Letters, the College of Social Science, James Madison College, the Residential College of Arts and Humanities, International Studies and Programs, the Center for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies, and the History Department. So lots of support for this lecture this evening. And my colleague, Professor Matt Pauley, is going to introduce our esteemed speaker. Matt Pauley is a professor in the History Department who's been an active affiliate of the Sterling Institute for many years. He wrote a really great book on breaking the tongue, language, education, and power in Soviet Ukraine. And he's currently working on a new book, City of Children, Juvenile Poverty, Crime, and Salvation in Odessa. So thank you so much for organizing this, Professor Pauley, and you'll do the introductions. Thank you.
Thank you. Dobry wieczór. Thank you to everyone coming out tonight and everyone out there in the YouTube land. We appreciate your presence. Yeah, I've been working on this project for a while. I consider myself maybe an honorary member of Historians of Southern Ukraine, and we're very lucky to have a true and legitimate member of that esteemed cohort of people who've long written really fantastic histories of Ukraine, certainly of the Soviet Union more generally, but also in fine detail about the region itself, which is a region I frankly think we really need to understand now. So we're coming up on a 2-year anniversary of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and we will enter the 3rd year of this horrific war. And Yuri's research is really about another period of violence that was meted out on the citizens of Soviet Ukraine, most certainly the Jewish citizens of Soviet Ukraine, but the community as a whole. And he will introduce us to the complexities of Soviet nationalities policy, but also to the way in which the Holocaust was prosecuted by occupying Axis authorities, and address larger dimensions of that problem as well. So I just think it's worth noting that this is a place that is not unfamiliar with violence and war. I'll just note that Yurii is from Kherson. Kherson, as some of you appreciate, was a city that was held by the Russian army for 13 months, in which horrific things occurred under Russian occupation. These are well documented. This is not Ukrainian propaganda that I'm giving you. You only need to look at verified news reports to see what happened. Hundreds of people, civilians, were killed, and hundreds more were taken into custody and disappeared into the custody of the Russian armed forces. And then there was this quite horrific dam that the Russians detonated upstream on Dnipro River, which flooded parts of the city. And of course, the fighting continues to go on the eastern bank of the Dnipro, and the city itself faces daily bombardment by Russian forces. So the people of Kherson have endured a lot over the past 2 years, and we'll learn about an earlier historical experience where violence was was felt by the citizens of the Kherson Oblast. So I would like to acknowledge that much of what, just so Yurii will talk to you about this, but the area which he will investigate in this talk is an area that is now part of what is Free Ukraine, but it's really not far from the front itself. There's really fierce fighting going on the river, the eastern river bank of the Dnipro, and the war, I'm sure, is felt intimately by the people that live around the area that Yurii will discuss, although, of course, the video was made before the full-scale invasion. So that's my reminder, I suppose, of the context in which we find ourselves. And so we're just really, really lucky to have Professor Kaparulin here. It's amazing that he ended up in Ann Arbor. I've been wanting him to come up for some time, and I'm so glad to see you finally be able to make the journey. So you'll forgive me if I'll read his credentials. It's sort of customary at these events, but he is absolutely worthy of the list of things that I will read out. So Professor Yurii Kaparulin is an associate professor at the Department of the National University of Kherson. He is a professor of international law and law enforcement and director of the Raphael Lemkin Center for Genocide Studies at Kherson State University. He studies the history and law of Eastern Europe with particular interest in the Holocaust and in genocide studies, human rights, crimes against humanity, and political repression in the Soviet Union. His research has been published in multiple journals, including the Ideology and Politics Journal, Colloquia Humanistica, I should have practiced that one, City History, Culture, and Society in Eastern Europe, as well as Holocaust Study, and a journal of about which I'm deeply familiar, Ukraina Moderna. Really cutting-edge work is appearing in this journal in both Ukrainian and English, and BBC News Ukraine. He's been researching the history of Jewish agricultural settlements in southern Ukraine for the past 5 years, and is a renowned expert in the subject. He's held multiple fellowships in 2018 to 2019. He held a research fellowship at the Jack Joseph and Morton Mandel Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. He's also held fellowships at Yahad Unum in Paris, France, and at the New Europe College in Bucharest, Romania, as well as the Center for Holocaust Studies at the Leibniz Institute for Contemporary History in Munich, Germany. Today, he's a fellow at the Weiser Center for Europe and Eurasia, Center for Europe and Eurasia. He's a Scholars at Risk member of the Scholars at Risk program, and a visiting scholar at the Frankel Center for Judaic Studies, all of which are at the University of Michigan. So we're really damn lucky that the University of Michigan has these resources and is able to host my distinguished colleague, and I just feel incredibly fortunate that you're able to come up here. So without further ado, Professor Yurii Kaparulin. Oh, you don't need this. You're mic'd up. All right. So just, I guess, a word of order, and just so you know the program, Yuri's going to lecture for a bit, and then he's going to show the film, and then we're going to engage in discussion of what we see, I suppose, and what might be elicited by his commentary as well. So we need this mic because we have people on YouTube, so I will be passing around the mic. So think about your questions most certainly, but raise your hand at the time of discussion and I'll scurry over to you and hand you the mic. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. And first of all, I would say thanks for my colleagues at Michigan State University for invitation, and I would say thanks to Michigan State University Sterling Institute for Jewish Studies and Modern Israel for organizing today's lecture and film screening, and also to Center for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies, and all sponsors who were mentioned today. But my personal thanks, of course, to my colleagues Yael Aronov and Professor Matthew Pauli. Yes, a couple years ago, I want to say I will present you only my ongoing historical project, but this topic what we will discuss today, not only historical now, because the Russian aggression and Russian war in Ukraine really affected on my work and ongoing research and on our field at all, I mean academic sphere. I will try to explain in my presentation about this a bit more. But I really want to start, I thought it would be nice maybe about today's evening in my diary or future memoirs that today I was not in antique Greece, but among the great Spartans of Michigan. So go Spartans, and thank you for having me today. And I prepared a short presentation before the movie, just give you understanding more deeply about the topic, because we didn't want to make this movie like classical documentary with a lot of texts or facts. Sometimes it's like with artistic pieces. So I thought it's good to have some verified facts before. And but previously I want to start from the map. This is not contemporary, I mean not recent days map, but from last year. And on this map you can see the territories of Ukraine invaded by Russia since 2014. So by the red you can see territories which under Russian occupation right now, but also you can see the blue spots. It's the territories which were liberated by Ukrainian forces last year. And I will talk about the Kherson region, the main city of Kherson, regional center, not far from Odessa, what Professor Pauli mentioned. And all Kherson region in this official borders was occupied on the start of full-scale invasion in 2022. But later our military forces, Ukrainian army, liberated a large part of Kherson region, including the city of Kherson. And now we have this natural border by largest river in Ukraine, the Dnipro River, what's split in two armies in Ukraine today. But let's back to the topic of presentation. I want to present you my ongoing research project called Between Soviet Modernization and Holocaust. It's my book project, what I planned to finish next years, but the full-scale invasion a bit changed my plans, but I'm still trying to finalize it. And it's about Jewish agrarian settlements in southern Ukraine. I'm focusing especially on Kherson region, what I mentioned on the map previously. And the chronological frame is 1924-1948. And I began working on this topic during my 2018-19 fellowship at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And in my research, I study the history of the local Jewish communities in the southern Ukraine and focus on the experience of violence against the community members under the first Soviet and then Nazi regimes during 1920s and 1940s. And I also draw attention to the multi-ethnicity and multiculturalism of Ukrainian history, in particular to Ukrainian Jewish relations at this time. In this work, I use the methods of local and microhistory to capture the background of era with a focus on special events on the ground. And as I mentioned on this slide, I have three main groups of questions. First of all, it's questions related to interwar period, 1924-1939. How did Soviet policy transform Jewish life in southern Ukraine? What was the relationship between Jews and non-Jews during this period? What was the economic significance of Jewish agrarian settlements in Kherson Oblast or Kherson region? And what was the impact of total collectivization, the Holodomor of 1932-33, well known as a great famine in Ukraine, also example of genocide in our history. And then the Great Terror, how these all events affected on local Jewish population. Second group of questions related to World War II period, 1939-1945. I try to figure out the questions that what were Jewish and Gentile responses to the anti-Jewish violence at that time. Who were the perpetrators on the ground? What were the peculiarities of how the Holocaust was carried out in southern Ukraine? Who collaborated and why? What were the conditions for survivals in urban Kherson city and rural settings and others? And last group of questions related to post-war period, 1945-1948. How did the Soviet authorities respond to the annihilation of Jewish population on the ground? What was the reaction of non-Jewish and returning Jewish Red Army veterans? What was Jewish life like during this period? And what happened to the Jewish property actually? Who was held accountable? And what trials occurred for collaborators? Were moderate Jews commemorated locally, if at all? And finally, how are Jewish and Holocaust histories in this region remembered today in contemporary Ukraine? According to the 1926 census, Soviet Ukraine, along with more than 23 million ethnic Ukrainians, or 80% of total population, was home to more than 2.5 million Russians, more than 1.5 million Jews, almost 500,000 Poles, also thousands Germans, Moldovans, Greeks, Bulgarians, Belarusians, and other representatives of other national minorities and ethnic groups. And significant number of these people lived in rural areas, especially in southern Ukraine, and these black spots on old Ukrainian map mention the new created national areas or national districts which was created by Soviet government in middle 1920s. And on this map you can see also established national district for Jews. It was at all 5 Jewish national districts called Kalinindorf, first created, then Novozolotopol, Stalindorf, Freidorf, and Larendorf. So 2 Jewish national districts were in Crimea, and other 3 were in southern Ukraine. And in my work, I focus on the first created Kalinindorf Jewish National District and other settlements of Kherson region in particular because its chronology allows us to follow the changes in Soviet policy that began in the middle of the 1920s and their impact on the local Jewish and non-Jewish rural population. And for your better understanding of the scale of this project, I want to point out that the territory of modern Kherson region shown on this map, on this old map, is larger than the state of Israel. So this how you can imagine a scale. And on this old map of Kherson region, on these spots, meaning that it was lands provided for Jewish settlers. From the early years of the Soviet Union, the south of Ukraine became the territory where a new social and economic experiment was implemented. And initially, the Soviets planned to resettle between 100,000 to 500,000 Jews to the region. The Soviet government had support from several international organizations, including AgriJoint, established by Jewish Distribution Committee, an American charitable organization based in New York. And for the purpose, tens of thousands of acres of land were allocated in the south of Ukraine, especially in Kherson region at that time. And one of the main goals of the resettlement was the desire to overcome the crisis of social and economic life of local Jews, to strengthen the influence of power on this milestone of population, and to increase international authority with the involvement of material support. But life for many people was not easy for the first few years, and they were forced to live in makeshift huts, as you can see on these pictures, or daggets. But soon most of them were able to build own houses in the middle 1920s, and it was because also received considerable material support from United States Joint Distribution Committee. Also, I want to mention that this story is like a part of Ukrainian and American history, and American charitable foundations like Joint put a lot of effort into raising charitable funds for buy all necessities for people, many of whom were new to farming, and in particular the newest American tractors have become one of the symbols of the settlers. And on these pictures you can see the American tractors in the Kherson fields on the work, and the factory which made these tractors is, I believe it's not far from us, it's near Illinois, yeah, so you can see the water boy model, or also the model John Deere tractors. And last year I found on local Michigan farm John Deere tractor, young brother of this previous old tractors. And also I found this newspaper from Chicago about collecting the money for support Jewish people in their goals to create own farms in Ukraine. In 1927, an important event took place, the opening of the first Jewish national district in Soviet Union, not only in Ukraine, but Soviet Union at all, centered in the village called Kalinindorf, formerly named Velyka Seidemynukha. And this district was named after one of the Bolshevik leaders, Mikhail Kalinin. It was like important event because you know that the state of Israel was not at that moment, but many Jewish people wanted to have some kind of own country or independent republic or something like this, and Soviet government tried to create and realize somehow this idea, but until the end of 1930s, this social-economic experiment did not fully achieve its goals, primarily due to process of collectivization, political repressions, and changes in the foundations of Soviet national politics, from the integration of ethnic minorities to assimilation. And in March 1939, the Central Committee of Communist Party adopted a resolution called "On the Elimination and Transformation of Artificially Created National Areas and Villages Councils," which were called the centers of enemies of the people. Unlike most Jewish national areas, formally were not liquidated, but finally World War II and Holocaust destroyed this unique world of Jewish farmers' communities that existed in this region of Ukraine. Holocaust started on these lands in the first month after German troops occupied the region in August 1941, and in 1952, during the post-war trial, Schoch, a former police chief, testified that the SS team consisted of 9 people under command of the German officer named Lunken, arrived in Kalinindorf to execute local Jews. Lunken ordered local residents to gather in the village. It was then when they separate Jews from non-Jews. The Kalinindorf Jews were locked up in the dairy farm, and the next day, September 16, 1941, mass killing action began. People were brought to anti-tank mode, ordered to undress and lie down, and then Germans shoot them. The clothes of the murdered Jews and their belongings found at the apartments were brought to a collective farm. In those days, only in one place, in Kalinindorf, there were killing up to 2,000 people, and then empty Jewish farms and houses were handed over by local Germans called Volksdeutsches and to other locals. After the liberation of Kherson region in March 1944, Jewish survivors tried to return to their homes and after the evacuation, and in the early post-war years they managed to build monuments with their own strength and thus took the first steps toward preserving the memory of the tragedy of Jews. But after 1948, an unofficial anti-Semitic campaign began in Soviet Union with the goal, among the other things, hiding Jewish history. So this is how the World War II and Holocaust were crucial destructive forces that ruined a unique phenomenon of Jewish agricultural settlements in Kherson region, in particular in the south of Ukraine in general. And the history of Jewish agrarian settlements in south of Ukraine is an integral part of Ukrainian and Jewish history. It's important to remember the history of Jewish people who, driven by idealism and ideology, tried to secure a better future, lived with their Ukrainian neighbors for centuries, made positive contribution to the local society, and were murdered in their hometowns during the Nazi Holocaust. But after the war, the history of Jewish victims and survivors also was hidden by Soviet policy, and that's why this memory was repressed during Soviet times. And this is why we tried to restore this memory, once repressed memory of Jewish settlements and their inhabitants. And we decided to make this documentary called Kalinindorf, which was filmed in the spring and summer of 2020 by our small team. And in the last part of presentation, I also want to draw your attention to how the Russian full-scale invasion and war against Ukraine has affected my work and this research. After the full-scale invasion on February 24, the territories of Kherson region, as I said, were among the first to be occupied by Russian troops. And during the 9 months of occupation, this village, Kalinivske, former Kalinindorf, and neighboring villages became the front line and suffered extensive destruction. And local residents, including participants and witnesses of World War II, faced new mass violence from new occupation authorities and Russian military. And there was no communication with local residents for among the entire period of occupation before the liberation of the right bank of Dnipro River in November 2022. And these events became a new layer in the stratigraphy of violence in this region after the Holocaust. I have 2 additional slides, but I won't discuss them after documentary screening. So now I would like to invite you to watch our movie, our documentary film called Kalinindorf.
Оце був 27-й рік, і це з цього часу почався єврейський національний район.
Єврейські села у нас були тут за річкою, виходить, всі. От це починається Калінінська, Бекут, їх тут 37 колоній. Цих людей привозили сюди ще при царях, ну, вони построїли свої дома, сади посадили і почали виживати. Построїли, викопали колодці свої.
Набігає вода і така мутна, що як і п'єш, так на зубах остається. Глина це прямо.
Ніхто його не трогає і ніхто його не завалить. Це бомбоубіжище.
Отут наші участвували поліцаї з Євгеновки і з Туркулова. Тоже це все єврейські колодці. Вони ж написали, ну, єврейським, да, євреям, які жили в нашій території, іменно совєтським, но почему-то українців сюди не кидали, русских сюди не кидали.
Кругом ми вже ж ніхто не знає мови. Слава Богу, в Береславі десь діда якогось знайшли. І це він нам поміг і перевів і написав. Це був протитанковий рів, який продовжувався до братської могили нашого Каліндорфа. Тягнувся він звідти туди.
В принципі, в цьому населеному пункті євреїв і нема, але все це живуть люди у єврейських домах.
Thank you for your attention, and what you watched, it's a big work of also my co-author, Les Kasyanov, co-author of this documentary Kalinindorf, and I just want to say thanks to him. He's in Ukraine. He was almost 5 months under Russian occupation in Kherson, but finally managed to evacuate himself and his family to Lviv. And last 2 years he living in Lviv. There's no safe places in Ukraine, but it's more safe than other cities, and I told him that we plan to watch this movie today at Michigan State University. So he was really glad to hear that. And now I just want to add about contemporary situation. So this is a map, it's just fragment of Google map which show you the right bank of Dnipro River and left bank. So this right bank, this piece of right bank of Dnipro River, it's where actually this Kalinindorf Jewish National District was. And this name of villages, contemporary villages, almost all of them were renamed. So almost any Jewish names left on contemporary map. And on the left bank you can see the small village called Krinki and Kazachi Lagiri and Korsunka. This is only a piece of land now under control of Ukrainian troops, and our military is trying to counterattack from this village deeply in Crimea, which extremely difficult right now, and this is why Ukraine needs a lot of to have counteroffensive successful. My co-author Les Kasyanov have visited this village last year after the deliberation, and I asked him, as he can't attend today in person, I asked him to tell a bit what he saw in this village and closest villages after the deliberation. And he recalled me that I was in Kalininsky this summer. The main character of the film, Volodymyr Zavodnyany, survived, although there were terrible rumors on the eve of his release, but he's alive and well and in good spirit, and when we met, he gave us some quotes. The museum has been turned into a point of invisibility, what meaning the humanitarian aid center. The mezuzah on the door that appeared at the beginning of the film was knocked down with a rifle by Russians. Volodymyr Zavodnyany was worried about the first inhabitant of the village, a snail, but the locals hid it. The school next to the museum was seriously damaged, and the Russians set up a torture chamber in it. Actually, by the way, in the 1930s, the museum's basement was an NKVD torture chamber, and now it's a bomb shelter. Katerina Gladstein, whom we interviewed, died before the invasion. The nursing home where the interview took place was completely destroyed, and the people were taken away by Russians. The house was located next to the place where Jews were shot, and the monument survived, but it is impossible to approach it because everything around is it's mined. The synagogue also survived, and Olga and 83-year-old women who survived two occupations recalled how Soviet soldiers liberated their village. The Orthodox Church, by the way, of the Moscow Patriarchate suffered, and Father Vitaly helped the locals a lot, took people out, but once he was captured when he tried to take out an Ukrainian veteran. In general, the village was badly damaged. I didn't see any fences or houses that were not cut by debris. Some houses were completely destroyed, like the one of Miss Tatiana and her daughter. Someone still occasionally explodes on mines because even the Ingulets River is mined. Also, the explosion of the Kakhovka Dam caused a lot of troubles. The water is still not safe to drink. It's only a piece of his travel notes, but I thought it's important to share it with you. And on the top you can see the address, the personal website of Les Kasyanov, where he presented his contemporary photographs from the ground, and you can compare the views from movies and how this place looks like after Russian occupation. Okay, thank you so much. I want to finish on this, and I hope you have questions, comments, and I will be happy to try to answer on it. Thank you so much.
If you have a question, raise your hand, and I'll bring you the mic. Thank you for that update, because that was one of my questions. I think in my preliminary comments, I lengthened the time of Russian occupation from 8 months to 13 months. It seems like that to me. So I'm grateful for the update of what actually occurred during the occupation on that side. Questions?
So something that wasn't quite clear to me during the course of the presentation was obviously the worst of the anti-Semitic attacks occurred during the German occupation. However, something I'm a little curious about was during the era of the Holodomor, during the famines. Did Soviet policy institute any major anti-Semitic acts in 1932, 1933? Were there any specific Jewish targets, or was it more generally the Ukrainians?
Thank you so much. It's a very interesting question, which I'm raising in my research, and my current article, what I'm working on right now, it's actually about the Jewish experience during the Holodomor, because Holodomor mostly well known as a great famine and genocide against Ukrainians, but in fact it was affected on not only ethnic Ukrainians but also ethnic minorities who lived in Ukraine at that time. It doesn't mean it means that they also were targets, and they also were victims of this genocide. And in my research, I show that some people, Jewish settlers, they experienced not only one genocide by Nazis, but previously they experienced Holodomor, previously collectivization, forced collectivizations, and Holodomor, then Great Terror. Of course, not all of them really survived until World War II, but some of them, yes. So they experienced all this Soviet repressive policy. And then some of them survived, but most not survived during the Nazi occupation and Holocaust. And for me, it's also important to show, and it's also the way deconstruct the myth of it. In historiography, it's called Żydo-Bolshevism, or Żydo-Bolshevism. It's meaning that it was made by Nazi propaganda, which say that Soviet authorities were Jewish or close to Jewish, and what Nazis do, they fight not only communists but also Jews. Yeah, so that's how they try to explain their aggressive war in their propaganda. And we see that, yeah, Jewish people also suffered under Soviet policy, and we can found these facts in memories, testimonies, diaries, sometimes in official documents, but not too much. Only in secret documents, which never were published in Soviet time. But now Ukrainian scholars, after Ukrainian independence from early 90s, have access to these documents, and now we have more sources and possibilities to study these questions. But thank you. It's a great question. Yeah.
I have a question about regarding like the language that is present within these communities. I know it was mentioned in the documentary that there was transcribing the old, it was referred to as Old Jewish on one of the monuments, and it was necessary to have I think an older member of the community come to transcribe it. Is that something that is reoccurring? Like, is that might be like an issue moving to the future, trying to transcribe these or researching documents that might not have, I guess, what is the situation of the language? I guess I'm not really too familiar with what was spoken there by the local communities. I'm assuming some of them probably spoke Russian or Ukrainian, but in addition to that, what was the language spoken there, and how does that play within the historical research today?
Thank you so much. Yeah, the question about language is really important, because working on this topic, I face it with many sources and in several languages. It's Ukrainian language sources, Russian language sources, English language sources because of agro-joint stuff, and of course Yiddish. On official level, Soviet government provided these people possibility to use Yiddish, their national language. It was not only for Jewish privilege, but for other ethnic minorities in 1920s. Then, until the 1930s, all this policy was cancelled. But in 1920s, yes, officially people used Ukrainian, Russian, and Yiddish in not only in everyday life, but also in official level, creating the documents. So I often found it in archive the documents written in Ukrainian and same text in Yiddish. So because they needed to send some documents to Kiev, to Ukrainian Soviet government, but on the ground they often used the Yiddish in daily documentary. So until today, almost nobody speak Yiddish, and some monuments they include description and names. Actually, not in English, but in Hebrew, because some of survivors or kids of survivors, they left these lands and moved to US, to Israel, but some of them before the full-scale invasion had a tradition to come and commemorate their relatives on these places, and they were supporters of building new monuments, and these new monuments were included Hebrew, Ukrainian, sometimes Russian description and names. Yeah, Yiddish or Hebrew speakers almost gone from these lands, unfortunately.
Thanks so much. So I have a couple questions. One is, it seemed in terms of the answers and maybe even some of the questions that were posed to some of the people, there's a real distinction made between Ukrainians and Jews, right? So at the time, if Jews were told to go there in 1800, but we're talking about 120 years later, or 130, 140 years after that, it seemed like they still weren't considered Ukrainians. And I don't know even if one of the questioners was depicting kind of the distinction again between Jews and Ukrainians. So I wanted to ask about that in terms of, during World War II in the 1920s, but also perhaps thereafter in the aftermath. And then a second question is, in a couple of the lectures we've had about kind of mass shootings during the Holocaust and these mass graves, there have been instances where locals will kind of come and gather and almost watch it, right? Almost as sport. And so, but in this documentary, it seemed like, maybe a single person happened to see it, but no one was actually in any of these instances watching the shootings. So I don't know if you can elaborate a little bit more on that, or how the non-Jewish kind of residents, elaborate on their reactions kind of at the time and now and so forth, because we only got a little bit of hints, but it seemed like they didn't really elaborate perhaps on how it made them feel, or what, or what they thought at the time about it.
Wow,
yeah.
It's a really great question. So I would start from relationships between Jewish and non-Jewish, mostly Ukrainians, on the ground before Second World War. And I have different sources. I have Jewish survivors' testimonies about their experience living before the war on these places. I have non-Jewish victims' testimonies collected by Yachad Enunum organization from Paris. And both of them say that relationships between Jews and non-Jews, because not only Ukrainians lived there, it was local ethnic Germans, Soviet Germans people, it was also Russian population, not only Ukrainians, and they said that relationships between Jews and non-Jews were excellent. Both sources say, or not bad, but sometimes fights, because neighborhood landing when they like try to split the acres, you know. But it was like not on the ground of ethnicity conflicts, but on about territory, about the owning the land. Actually, I trying to show these difficulties in my recently published article in Ukraina Moderna journal, where I am analyzing the testimony of Jewish woman Rita Rosenberg. She was not a local, but her aunt was local, and she came to her every summer several years before the war. So she recalled what she saw on these villages, how people lived, what they did. And she mentioned that her aunt had many Ukrainian friends, neighbors in her village and neighbors in neighboring villages. Also, she had a friend, Volksdeutsch woman from neighboring village, Aunt Marta. She called her Aunt Marta. But everything's changed during the World War II in some cases. Actually, I wanted to say that I also found several cases and testimonies when it was inter-ethnic marriages between Jews and Ukrainians, because many Jewish people abandoned the traditional culture in Soviet times before the World War II because of Soviet policy, which tried to assimilate these people and say that you are all now Soviet citizens. You have no differences and ethnicity is nothing. Yeah, so you feel free to have a relationship with who you want. So, and many people did so, and it's really complicated to speak in general about your questions. But we need study this question through case study. And so what I tried to do in my recent article, I tried to show how relationships changed during the German occupation. And what I found, this Jewish woman during the World War II, she was just 12 years girl. She recalled that after the most Jews were murdered by Nazis, they were killed near this old well and put it there. And she survived only because she was last in the line to Kalinin near this well, and she asked the German officer, and she told him that she is not Jewish. That she came here accidentally. That she is from Kiev, and she said that her aunt neighbor, Ukrainian man who participated in this action like a local police member, because when Germans came, they created a local police unit, and some locals participated in this. And she asked this German officer, ask her neighbor that he can support her words, and he supported it. So he on the one hand he helped her, but on the other hand he was not a participant in shooting, but he participated in distribution property later. You know, he was criminal, but he helped survive one Jewish girl. So it's all sometimes in gray zones, you know. And studying the criminal case of this man, his name was Semen Billy. if you study just criminal case, because after the war, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison, in Gulag, in concentration camp. You can find many details from official case, but after I found this testimony of it's actually testimony from Shoah Foundation Visual History Archive from California, several hours testimony. So I found some pieces which opened me absolutely another view on situation and did some very important details. So, and what happened after the war, relations changed again, because some people who survived the Nazi occupation in the east of Soviet Union, they tried to return back and return their houses, lands, and often when they did, they found a new owners, because not only Germans provided after Holocaust these lands and houses for new local residents, but after liberation, Soviet government gave this property, Jewish property, to NKVD units, so police units, officers or other people, and that's why it was conflicts based on property. But then it was also anti-Semitic campaign in Soviet Union from late 1940s, and people in testaments recall that they also felt like anti-Semitic pressure on them. That's why many of them left these territories, and they moved to other cities, or they moved, for example, to deep east of Soviet Russia, because their Russian government, Russian government provided them another option called Birobidzhan, like national Jewish autonomy. And then in the late 1980s, many people had chance to go out from Soviet Union, and this how the testimonies of people were recorded in many countries in 1990s, when for example, Shoah Foundation, the Steven Spielberg project was started. Yeah. Sorry, it's maybe too much.
Dr. Simon.
Hi, thank you so much. I have less of a historical and more of a question about how you came to the process of making the documentary, and how you chose how to make the documentary, and also a little bit more about the guy who features in it and the museum and kind of the background of that story.
Thank you so much. So I never planned to create this movie like some main project. I'm historian, so one day I started to looking for a new topic for study, and when I went to a local archive, I found documents on creation of this Jewish national district in our region, and I thought, oh my God, what is it? And I started to study deeply, and I understood that the history of Jewish settlements, actually the first Jewish settlements in our region were created on the start of 19th century, and the period from start of 19th century till the start of 20th century is more well covered than the Soviet period and what happened during the World War II and Holocaust. And that's how I started my research project. But couple years after, I tried to put all in this somehow built story. I understood that I never saw these places, and I decided to go there. And it's not too easy to go there because it's like in deep steppe, in deep fields. So it's no good roads which lead there. And but I joined to a group of people who came from Israel. Day of commemoration, and it was organizing trip to memorial places. And when I returned back, I understood that I need something more, and I decided to organize a small expedition just for a week or two. And it was difficult to do so just myself, and I needed some team, and I found my great friends and colleagues who agreed to join me and organize this small expedition. And our idea was just create a travel movie, because I thought it's great to say about this story. My local citizens in Kherson, because almost nobody know about this story in mass, and we decided that the better way today it's not to write a text but create some short documentary, and this is how we use this public history approach to promote our local history to local residents. And we organized several movie screening in not only in Kherson but in several cities in Ukraine, and it was great experience for us. And most important, we had audience who reopened this story for themselves or opened first time. So yeah, it's very short, very briefly about the creation of the movie and idea. And about the main character, the Volodymyr Zavodnyany, so his background, he is local. He lived all the life in these lands, and he was a teacher, he was director of school, and now he retired, but still director of this school museum, which provides this local history. And he was one of the first people on the ground who tried to recover the Holocaust victims' history, banned in Soviet times. So, and he is super charismatic man. He's I don't know how it's how you feel it in movie, but he's really positive in any situation. He tried to stay positive in any situation, and as my co-author recall, even after experience under Russian occupation, I saw his face is changed. He looks more. He looks tired, but he's still trying to save humor. I don't know. So he's for me like a symbol. How we all should resist and trying to save positive view on the world and our future. Yeah. Maybe I'll stop on this.
Any more questions? All right, I think we're at time. I have plenty of questions, but I'll talk to you about those over dinner. So please join me in thanking Professor Yurii Kaparulin from Kherson. It was a pleasure to have you, and I learned a great deal, so I hope everybody did. Thank you very much.